Sometimes, by the way, this was referred to as the financing gap in the Herod-Domar model. And since domestically these poor countries aren't saving enough, the solution was foreign aid. So it became the major justification for all of the foreign aid programs that were implemented in the post-World War II period. All of the major foreign aid programs that turned out to be disasters, that failed to produce any of the results that the model predicted, which is one of the reasons why the Herod-Domar model was discredited. And in fact, Domar himself repudiated the model. Now, what's interesting about this whole wrong direction in the history of growth theory is that it led to several conclusions. All right, why isn't foreign aid working? Why isn't increasing the capital stock making these countries richer? Well, there are two possible reasons. One is that investment and saving is not the binding constraint, which of course shifts you to technology. The other, which I think was definitely true, is the aid wasn't going to genuine investment. It was going to malinvestments, to political consumption. And that, of course, there's a lot of empirical evidence to support that conclusion. So that's Herod-Domar. Any questions? You will probably, if you take a course in economic development, last time I checked, I haven't looked at the most recent editions of textbooks, but most of your development textbooks usually start out talking about this model and presenting this model. I'm not sure why, but anyway, so that leads us to the Solow-Swan model. And remember what I said last week. All of these models assume that investment depends on saving, that saving above depreciation increases the capital stock, and that increases in the capital stock under the right conditions lead to an increase in output. And the three assumptions that the Solow model adds to that is that people save at a constant percentage of their income, which also was in the Herod-Domar model. The rate of depreciation is a physical constant, and there are diminishing returns to capital. So those three assumptions lead to the standard graph of the Solow model. And capital per person. So if you're assuming diminishing returns to capital, you're going to have, and assuming that the labor force is fixed and that technology is fixed, right? As you increase capital per worker, you're going to have an increase in output, but at diminishing returns. Saving is a constant percentage of income, and therefore your saving curve, right, is 30% of of output, 20%, whatever number you exogenously plug in, and this is saving equals investment. I'm going to put in real terms, just to be clear. And then, of course, because depreciation is a physical constant, as the capital stock grows, the depreciation line is a straight line. All right, and then all the conclusions follow, right? If your economy is down here, you're saving above the rate of depreciation, you're enjoying capital accumulation. The economy grows, output per person grows until you hit this point, known as the steady state. All right? If you're up here, then the economy depreciation exceeds savings. You're consuming capital, capital consumption is taking place, and you move down to that point in the steady state. In other words, you don't get sustained growth from the model. You only get a level effect that brings you to the steady state. The Solow model doesn't explain what it's supposed to explain. Now, if you add in population growth, right? In other words, I was assuming population growth is 0, but if population growth is positive, then you have to increase the capital stock, right, to cover for the increase in population, which means that now, in other words, during this period, you've got capital accumulation per person. Here you've got the capital stock growing, covering depreciation and growing at the rate that the population grows. So capital per person remains constant, output per person remains constant, and you still only have a level effect. If that wasn't bad enough, all right, that wasn't bad enough, the steady state can be suboptimal. All right, and how can the steady state be suboptimal? Well, because this line is a straight line, right, and this line exhibits decreasing returns, which means eventually they're going to meet, right? And when they meet, that's an economy in which there's zero consumption, because all of the output is going to maintain the capital stock. You don't want to be there. Where do you want to be? You want to be where consumption is maximized. What is consumption? Consumption is the distance between these, the depreciation. Well, I need to be more specific about that. Consumption is the difference between savings and output, right? So in other words, if this is savings, this amount is consumption. And what steady state maximizes consumption? The steady state that maximizes this difference, which of course is the steady state, where the derivatives of the two lines are equal to each other. And that's known as the golden rule steady state. In other words, if your steady state is up here, you have this anomalous situation where people can save less, right? Output per person goes down, and yet consumption goes up. Has that ever been observed in the real world? Where an economy is saving at a rate so high that people can actually reduce their savings and reduce the output of the economy, and yet they can consume more. Never. Never. Now, there are 4 ways of changing the steady state. Right? You can change the rate of savings. You can change the rate of population growth, lower the rate of population growth. You can have some change in the rate of depreciation, right? Or, and this, by the way, is one of the things that Snowden and Bain actually, I think, make clearer than Mankiw. Or you can have a technological improvement. Now, what does the technological improvement do? It means that at every level of capital, you get more output. In other words, you can have your production function shift upward. But none of those changes are going to give you sustained growth unless there's a sustained change. In other words, an increase in the savings rate will only give you a level effect unless the savings rate is continually increasing, right, over time at a fixed rate. A decline in population will only give you a level effect unless the rate of growth of the population is constantly declining. And the same with depreciation. So logically, it follows from the assumptions of the model that therefore growth must be explained, because the only thing we can imagine generating sustained changes is technological innovation. And so the Solow model has been trotted out to demonstrate that technology is the binding constraint in economic growth. And it's what makes poor countries poor and rich countries rich, but it only reaches that conclusion because it's embedded into the underlying assumptions. All right. In Mankiw chapter 8, he presents what's referred to as the augmented Solow model, where he assumes that there is a steady rate of technological innovation, right? Technology is still exogenous, but he assumes that there's a steady rate of technological innovation, and therefore gets sustained economic growth. Snowden and Bain cover that model. I think Mankiw's presentation was a little bit more easier to follow. The augmented Solow model, Snowden and Bain also referred to it as the MRW model, the Mankiw-Romer-Wheel model. So those are all, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But what I want to do now is give you a critique of the Solow model from the perspective of Austrian economics and a critique of growth accounting. I think all 3 assumptions of the model are dubious. Making savings, making savings exogenous, I don't think is helpful, because one of the important things that affects the rate of savings is the interest rate. And one of the things that affects the interest rate is the marginal productivity of capital. So it's hard to imagine that as you go to your steady state, right, that the rate of savings is somehow going to remain constant. And one nice illustration of this comes actually from Solow, from Mankiw's chapter. Another bizarre feature of the Solow model. This is where he's presenting the golden rule steady state, and he has a simple Cobb-Douglas production function, and